welcome to Open Source episode 30. Yes, the big 30. Today we've got a very interesting episode. It's a little bit different from the previous ones we've had with you, where we talked about what we thought was interesting in the news, what made us wonder. Because Mark and Rory and myself, we have weekly calls every Monday morning. And this call was quite an interesting, and we thought we'd share it with you guys. But just before we go into that, Rory's got a special announcement to make. Rory?
So yes, celebrating some success in our community. So not one, but two people in our community, winners of the European of Legal Tech 2020 Award. So Stefania Passera, who won in the Academia and Education section, well done to her. And Helena Hapio came sixth. Really no mean feat. And what they're both doing, just to let you know, is working in the area of creating more human readable contracts. And one example which I saw recently was an NDA which has become the standard used by Airbus, and they were able to redesign it so it looked really friendly and approachable and then easy to implement. And I know it sounds not very techy, but of course the results of the work are delivered through tech. So if your company ever needs contracts that interact with humans, say easy to understand insurance policies, then Helen and Stefania are the go-to global experts. So well done to them.
Excellent. Yeah, indeed.
Brilliant.
Congratulations. So thanks for that, Rory. So back to the conversation we had on Monday, and I'm going to give you a clue. It has to do with Mark's background image, and it has to do with the gut, the heart, and the mind. Mark, do you want to give us a little introduction by what do you mean by the heart, the gut, and the mind, please?
Yeah, so an interesting piece around us. We are a distributed system. So there is a very tenuous link back to blockchain and distributed ledger technology. But actually, as humans, as decision-making engines, we are distributed, and we have more than one intelligence. We have more than one brain. This is something that's existed in sophisticated cultures for thousands of years. So all the isms, shamanism, Sikhism, Taoism, etc. For example, the Chinese have a great saying where they say, the head is the general, but the heart is the emperor. And some of the things I'm going to describe, credit should go to the late, great Grant Suzalu and another guy called Marvin Oka, and they did a piece of research around multiple intelligences, M-braining, and the links between neuroscience and that. So to keep things simple for us, we've got three brains that we'll talk about today independently. So first of all, we've got the head brain. Point the right way, my head works. So we've obviously known about this a lot, and we've been obsessed about it since the Enlightenment, since Gutenberg invented the printing press, and we democratized knowledge and education. We've been obsessed with it. So the head brain's highest expression is around creativity. And hey, in our industry, we love creativity. It's got around 100 billion neurons, and we link it to other functions in terms of cognitive perception. So how we recognize patterns, thinking, so how we reason, how we abstract, how we analyze, synthesize, etc. And then how we make meaning. So our semantic processing, our human language and narrative around that. So that, head brain, really powerful tool. If we move around then to the heart brain, and again, independent intelligence. Okay, so we know this because donors, we've got documented evidence of donors exhibiting memories and values and beliefs of the people that donated the hearts to them that they never knew. So there's some fascinating stories around that. The fun fact, if it ever pops up in a pub quiz, our heart brain has got between 30 and 120,000 neurons, which is equivalent to a lobster's brain. Now, whilst you might not think that's impressive, what is impressive is, first of all, the heart brain's highest expression is around our compassion. It deals with our emoting, so those emotions, anger, grief, passion, etc. Our values, so when we process what's important to us. Just look around, you'll see it when people talk to you about things. That was really important to me, or such and such really offended me or upset me. We will touch our heart when we talk about it. It's also about our relational effect. So our felt connection with other people is important. And we'll see this in language as a sign. So things like, my heart wasn't in it, or, you know, she wears her heart on her sleeve, he was heartbroken. We'll have some physical signs about heart palpitations, around emotional stonewalling. You know, you ask somebody how are they, are fine, they put the barriers up to protect themselves, other pieces. So that's the heart brain, really important. And when we talk about, and we'll talk about this in a little while, about people that are purpose-led in their internal energy, a lot of it comes from the heart. And then if we move south, turn the right way to the other one, we have the gut. So the gut brain. So a little bit more known, but not necessarily fully understood. So the gut brain, first of all, first thing that's formed when we're created as a human being, contains around 500 million neurons. It's about the same as a cat's brain, and we know that cats are pretty smart. It, as I said, first thing that's formed when we're created, it produces 85% of our antibodies. It's often a great barometer for when we're not right. So without getting too explicit, when things firm up or loosen up, the gut is usually feeling it first. Its primary and its highest expression is around courage. Then it looks at our core identity. So who we are, this deep and visceral sense. And bearing in mind, we often conflate what we do with who we are, but identity is really important to us. It deals with our self-preservation. So our safety of others, things that are important to us, boundaries, you know, our hungers, our aversions, that primary survival, but the greater sort of self-actualization. And then it also deals with our mobilization. So things that get us going, yeah, and how we act. And again, the language thing. So people will talk about gut instinct a lot, a gutsy move, or they'll talk about, you know, deep down, it didn't feel right. Or even if I've got butterflies in my stomach, we'll get the physical signs as well. So the gut brain works all the way up to here. So if you see somebody swallowing, they're taking info down. It's important. If you turn your nose up at things, again, another turn of phrase is gut brain, cramping, or even if you hear scatatorial language. So if somebody says, I'm really off, or that idea is absolutely sh, that's their gut brain speaking. Now, why does this all make sense as a distributed system? Well, when things aren't right, and if you guys can imagine, and I don't need the detail unless it's a cracking story, but if you've ever made a decision that didn't feel right, but you made it anyway, and it turned out it wasn't a good decision, things didn't turn out as you'd planned or wanted them to. If you can reflect back, think about where it didn't feel right in your body. So I see smiling and slight grimacing. Don't play cards with Rory, he's very good. But typically what happens is something we call neuroinhibitor blocking. So one of our intelligences, often but not always this, is trying to overrule the others. Whereas when we're aligned as a distributed system, things can be really powerful and magical, and we know that it feels right. Somebody used the phrase with me earlier on a call with a team I was working with. Good, when it right feels easy, and when it doesn't feel right, it's difficult. So I can see you nodding. So that's just a quick kind of meander into those multiple intelligences. So it's great to know we got two more than we thought we had.
It's fascinating because I recall, you know, during our conversation, and I instinctively jumped to when those three brains are in alignment. You know, the expression I used during our call is, you know, you feel as though you're floating. You know, you feel connected, you feel energized, and like you're unstoppable. I mean, ever since, you know, I launched this initiative to try and reimagine the carbon markets, you know, by in a manner that can create a prosperous economy, a regenerative nature, and thriving local communities. It's like if those three brains merged, you know, or connected together, and you feel, you know, energized, which, let's be honest, during this whole COVID situation, you know, it's been stress, it's been anxieties, and then out of the blue, this source of energy just comes out. And I don't know, you know, if that's something you've seen, you know, with some of the people you've interacted with, is this kind of connection that happens.
We often do our wonder of the week, right? And mine this week would be probably around what's the future look like for that distribution. So in other words, as computers more and more take over the right-hand side of Mark's visual there, you know, how much how many extra neurons will we get in the other areas, and how much more powerful will we be in those in terms of our instincts and so forth. And obviously, we're not the only animals who have such distributed systems. So the octopus, for instance, has only about a third of its neurons in its brain, and the rest are all over its tentacles. And so it would just be interesting to see where evolution takes us, right?
Have you been watching My Octopus Teacher on Netflix by any chance?
Yes. Brilliant. But it is all those things. So again, you know, as we talk about these connected systems and empathy, and I mean, first of all, back to your point, Walid. So what we often see is when these things are connected, that helps fire us in terms of where our energy and power comes from. So we can often see, you know, if you've got a high intrinsic energy, and you're motivated by that rather than a direct, oh, it's for power or for wealth or success. You know, you can see the entrepreneurs and the teams that are motivated by affect, not by cause, and then we can see the difference that the cause-led people. So there's, you know, what's the difference between a push versus a pull, and doing that. And when people come together and they're united by a common cause and the power that brings, I think it is significant. And Rory, I think to your point, as we talk about, and again with, you know, the current situation, we're all aspiring to be more empathetic and more understanding, and again, yeah, can we divert some bandwidth towards that if something we're taking care of the thinking. And again, I go back to history. If you look at some of the more sophisticated cultures, they were deeply empathetic and they were deeply based upon what they were, not just being obsessed with the head. But I get why we were. As I said, you know, knowledge was our way out of the bondage of slavery. The only way we learned prior to the printing press, for example, was people that were rich enough to employ scribes in the church that had it. So, you know, we didn't democratize knowledge until then. So that was a huge way out. But we've been obsessed with all our thinking, and more as, you know, in the current environment, we've re-examined what's important to us, because it's been challenging us at a belief level, at an identity level. And why is all that important in the context of us talking about this from an InsureBlock's point of view? Because, you know, people in this community, people that are trying to affect change, people that are trying to run their own startups and business, so much is around the passion and energy that they create. You know, almost the order qualifier is they're smart. There's so many smart people out there, but it's about how they're able to channel and focus that is what's really fascinating, and help each other. You know, that's what we're trying to do on this community level, is how do we interact and support each other as a connected system.
Yeah, and I think it's about being genuine, you know, in all these points. Again, I keep referring to this project I'm working on. You know, it has a cause, but also it's about it's a human organization, a human network, where we're basically here to develop and support each other. So, for example, recently I'll be launching next week a guide, a workshop guide on how do you build your own startup, so that a lot of the people who are part of this community, of this movement, can also gain some real skills, you know, and having one-on-one conversations with each of the close to 40 volunteers we now have. But it is about that. It's about being able to demonstrate. But I do have a question for you, Mark. Do you believe that in startups is definitely there, but in the incumbent industry, how are decisions being made? Are they using all three brains, or is it usually just one, you know, the brain? And what are the consequences of that?
So I think it's a real mixture. So in some of the established businesses and organizations, so what we can see is gut brain working quite actively at the forefront, in part because of a preservation piece. So it's a survival. So first of all, you know, within an organization, within any organization, it's not a criticism of them, but first of all, we adapt to survive, and then we thrive. And when it's established, a common behavior can be, I look at what I'm going to lose rather than what I'm going to gain, and I want to protect that. And typically in decision making, and we've modeled this, people will have a gut instinct and they'll talk about, well, why do I pick this and do that? It just felt right. And then they will post rationalize. So they'll then go upstairs to the head to access the facts and figures that will support their intuition and feeling, rather than the other way around. So that's one example. What you can see is a highly values based approach to some organizations, and this doesn't have to be the common ones that we'd cite. I mean, if we take World Plastic Bank, that's a highly values driven. If you look at Patagonia in terms of what they do, and I know there will be quarters of people that are criticizing for greenwashing, but there are a number of things that they do around that from Patagonia point of view, and they've been very consistent with that over a long period of time. There was a great example posted this afternoon on LinkedIn from the guy that founded Brewdog, the brewer, just 10 mistakes I'm making and what I learned from him. So it was really authentic behavior in terms of understanding some of the values around that as well. So we will see a lot of values-based organizations. They won't be exclusive, so they'll fire in different scenarios and different situations as well. So we can't turn around and say it's one or the other, but what we can say is there can be a lot of environmental factors that will influence these things, not least quarterly earnings.
Yes. But it's interesting because, and I think that comes back to a point you were making prior to this call, Rory, is that, as we start to increasingly automate processes and automate decision making, through the use, for example, of AIs, what will the future of AIs make their decisions based on? Is it going to be just on a brain, because there's no heart? Can you codify a heart brain? Can you codify a gut brain? And if we can't, are we losing something important by having an AI that just uses a brain?
Which explains that nightmare scenario that people often fall back on when talking about AI driving cars around, if you have to hit an old lady or a child, which one do you choose? I mean, it's a ridiculous example, but it's an example of how you translate this distributed system into a very linear one, which is, purely left-brained and very interesting, isn't it? And I don't think you can. I don't think because we're benefiting from these three elements. I don't think you can really replicate that in a very linear system. And it explains also my question before around what happens in evolution. What becomes more important? Is it that we get bigger brains like Megamind, or is it that we get more empathy, which is actually what I'd like to get more of at the moment?
Yeah, and again, there are a couple of things around that, and I think it's a really great point, Rory, and maybe we should get in touch with the Google guys that we were chatting about last week in terms of the underspecification of the AI in terms of their testing methods. But I think it is, they're at the moment focusing on one processor when they could be accessing three on that. But what I would say as well is I think most people are familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder by now, in terms of a bad event, but what we're also learning a bit more about is post-traumatic stress growth, so PTSG, to add to the list of acronyms. But in the context, we can see, and we've got evidence of people, for example, that have had surgeries. If you talk about their heart, they've had some growth and been able to access other things. There've been periods of time where it's been kind of protecting that, but we've seen the growth out of that, and things have really changed. I mean, I take early signs. My dad has been in recently for heart valve replacement, and my dad, to quote my mum, is a man of a few words, and he won't stop talking at the moment. We're having fantastic conversations about things, and his way of expressing it. And it's not that he was emotionally stunted. I always felt loved by him, but suddenly things are coming out in a completely different way. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating story. I remember when you told it the first time, it cracked me up. I just got one last point I'd like to ask to the both of you is, organizations, they've got their quarterly, reports, which for me sounds very much like a brain. But then if you look about the increasing importance of ESG, environmental, social and corporate governance, is that bringing some of the other brains into it, would you say?
I would say definitely there's an element of a conscience in there, and a conscience is a heartfelt piece, first of all, and it can be a gut felt piece that, is this who we are? And that's happened. And I think, we've already seen some great examples by people like Dole Foods around that. We're also seeing, I think in the same way we've seen some of the rating agencies rate on innovation, I think we're going to see greater and greater rating on ESG. And again, because it's it can be economically advantageous as well as from a societal point of view. So why wouldn't we do it?
100%.
It's a very useful framework as well. If you look at some of the companies who over time have lost their way, the Enrons, the WorldComs of recent history, the Carillions, whatever it is, these are companies that just didn't have that sort of backing it didn't have a genuine backbone to go back on and to refer back to. So yeah, definitely agree with you, Mark.
And again, just a bit, so backbone, okay, a metaphor for courage. Gut. Thank you. Brilliant illustration.
Thank you. Well, thank you both very much, for your fascinating insights and views on this important topic. What do you guys think? Do you have some amazing stories you want to share with us, like Mark's dad, and or any others, which combines the combination of those three brains? We'd love to hear about it. And if you'd like to join in one of our upcoming calls, please don't hesitate. We'd love to have you. But for now, wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and we'll be catching up with you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.